All right, so today we're diving deep into something pretty unsettling. We're going to be looking at how state-sponsored hackers are using small and medium businesses, your everyday SMBs, as a launch pad to infiltrate government systems.
Yeah.
Oh, and what's the catch this time?
Well, the really interesting part is it's not just brute force hacking.
Okay.
They're combining cyber tactics with information operations.
Uh,
Think disinformation and online manipulation.
wow, so they're hacking systems and manipulating what people see and believe online.
Exactly.
It's a double whammy, right? Like, are we talking about things like SolarWinds, that hack, or the CCleaner compromise?
Precisely, you got it.
Okay.
Think about the 2016 U.S. election.
Oh, wow.
The Russian APT group Cozy Bear, those guys are known for being stealthy.
Yeah.
They hacked the Democratic National Committee,
Right.
but they didn't just steal data.
Oh, so it was more than just that.
Way more. They leaked emails strategically, amplified divisive narratives using fake social media accounts.
So they basically created chaos.
Yeah, it was a perfect storm of chaos and distrust,
Yeah.
ultimately aimed at swaying the election.
It seems like they achieved their goal, sadly.
Yeah, it's not just about data theft. It's about weaponizing information for strategic gain.
Wow. So is this happening globally, too? I mean, I immediately think about what we saw during the pandemic.
Absolutely. China used the anxieties surrounding COVID-19. They were pushing narratives about the virus originating in U.S. labs.
Really?
Yeah, they even used fabricated WHO documents.
What?
Yeah, and a network of bots to spread these claims.
So they preyed on fear and uncertainty
Yeah,
to spread their message.
exactly.
That's kind of scary, It makes you think about your own online behavior,
Absolutely.
like how emotions can influence what we believe, what we share.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
I bet a lot of people listening have felt that pull themselves at some point.
I'm sure.
Like you read a headline, you get angry, and you just share it without even thinking twice.
Happens all the time.
So we've touched on Russia and China, but are there other major players in this whole cyber meets info ops game?
Definitely. There are a lot of players on the field.
Okay.
But to really break down the game, let's look at the tactics of some specific APT groups.
Advanced persistent threat groups.
You got it, also called APTs.
Right.
We can start with APT-29, also known as Cozy Bear.
Cozy Bear. Okay, I remember them from earlier.
Yeah, linked to Russian intelligence.
So what's their MO, their modus operandi? How do they work?
Well, what makes APT-29 dangerous is how well they understand the trust between SMBs and government agencies.
Oh, interesting.
They often target IT firms or consulting companies that work with government clients.
So they use those smaller companies as a bridge to get into those secure networks.
Exactly, like sneaking in through the back door.
Makes sense. And what tools are they using to do this?
Well, they've been connected to sophisticated malware, like Wellmess, designed to avoid antivirus software,
Uh-oh.
and a backdoor called Goldmax for stealing credentials and moving around a network undetected.
So they're basically hijacking the trust between those smaller companies and their government clients.
Right.
So is the SolarWinds attack a good example of how they work?
The SolarWinds attack is a perfect example.
Okay.
They were able to compromise SolarWinds, a major software vendor, to insert malicious code into updates.
Oh, wow.
Those updates went out to thousands of organizations, including a lot of U.S. government agencies.
Huge impact.
It was a massive supply chain attack.
Okay, and you mentioned APT-41 earlier, also called WinT, and that they're linked to China.
Right.
What makes them stand out?
They have this two-pronged approach. It's fascinating.
Oh, okay.
They target construction and engineering firms that have access to critical infrastructure,
Okay.
but they also go after media companies.
To control the narrative.
Yeah, to manipulate the information landscape.
So they could disrupt physical systems and manipulate public perception at the same time.
It's a double threat.
Yeah.
So what kind of tools are we talking about here?
Right, what are they using?
They've been linked to the ShadowPad backdoor. It's hidden in legitimate software.
Oh, wow.
And Pudor, R-A-T, a remote access Trojan that gives them control of infected systems.
Okay, so that ShadowPad thing reminds me of the CCleaner compromise from a few years back.
You're right.
Didn't they use a similar tactic there?
Yeah, in 2017, APT-41 hacked the CCleaner development server, which was owned by a small software company called Piriform.
Okay.
And they were able to put their malware into software updates.
Wow.
So millions of users downloaded it without knowing.
Millions.
Yeah, including government contractors.
So even something as simple as a software update can be compromised.
It was a huge wake-up call about how vulnerable our software supply chains are.
Right, so even tools that seem harmless, like CCleaner,
Exactly.
could be a way in.
Right.
Okay, well, it seems like these APT groups are getting more and more sophisticated.
No, definitely.
Can we break down some of the technical tactics they're using? You mentioned spear phishing earlier.
Sure.
Can you tell me a little more about that?
So spear phishing is a classic tactic.
Okay.
It's about crafting emails that look like they're from a trusted source, like a colleague.
Oh, so you think it's from someone you know?
Yeah, or a vendor or something.
Right.
And those emails contain malicious attachments.
Oh, like what kinds of things?
It could be Word documents, Excel spreadsheets with malware embedded in them.
I see.
APT41, for example, has been known to use rigged Excel macros to deliver Cobalt Strike Beacon malware.
So it's not just your run-of-the-mill spam.
No, not at all.
These are really targeted attacks.
Exactly. They're designed to trick specific people.
Okay, but their tactics go beyond spear phishing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What else are they doing?
They exploit vulnerabilities in software, they compromise websites to host malware,
Right.
and they even use legitimate tools that are already on a system.
Oh, so they're using tools that are already there to avoid detection.
Exactly. It's a technique called living off the land.
Living off the land. Okay, and why is that so hard to detect?
Well, they're using tools that already have a legitimate reason to be there.
Oh, I see.
So it's really difficult to tell the good from the bad.
That's really sneaky.
It is.
So living off the land, what kinds of tools are we talking about?
Things like PowerShell scripts, WMIC for remote commands, even cloud services like Google Drive for data exfiltration.
So it's all about blending in with normal user activity.
Precisely.
That's really clever and a little terrifying.
Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated.
So for those of us who aren't tech experts,
Right.
could you maybe walk us through a typical attack step by step? Like,
Sure.
what does this cyber kill chain look like?
Absolutely. So let's say Cozy Bear wants to access data from a government agency.
Okay.
The first step is reconnaissance.
Okay.
They gather intelligence from public information and social media, looking for connections to their target.
So like finding a small IT firm that works with the agency they want to target.
Exactly. They're building a profile, looking for weak points.
Okay, then what?
Then comes weaponization.
Yeah.
They craft a spear phishing email disguised as a message from a trusted source.
Like a vendor or something.
Exactly. They'll attach a document containing malware.
Oh, so like those Excel macros we talked about?
Yeah, something like that.
So what happens if someone opens that attachment?
That triggers the exploitation phase.
Oh, no.
The malware is executed, giving the attackers their first foothold on that IT firm's network.
Okay, so they're in.
Yeah, and from there they move laterally, using stolen credentials or exploiting vulnerabilities to access other systems.
So they're moving towards their ultimate goal, the government agency.
Precisely.
Okay, so they've made it into the agency's network. What happens next?
Now they need to stay hidden and achieve their objective.
Okay.
They might install backdoors for future access, establish command and control channels.
So they can get instructions?
Right, and they'll start taking data back to their servers.
And they're doing all of this without being detected.
Right, using those living off the land techniques we talked about.
Blending in with normal activity?
Exactly. It's a constant back and forth between security teams trying to block them and the attackers trying to stay ahead.
It's a cat and mouse game.
Definitely.
Can we look at some real-world examples to see how these kill chains play out in practice?
Absolutely.
You mentioned the Microsoft Exchange server hack earlier.
Yeah, so in 2021, a Chinese group called Hafnium exploited zero-day vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange servers.
Oh, right. Zero-day vulnerabilities. We should probably talk about those a little more, too.
Yeah, we can get into those.
But so these Microsoft Exchange servers were primarily used by SMBs, right?
Right.
So they were exploiting weaknesses that even Microsoft didn't know about.
Yeah, like finding a secret back entrance.
So how did they use that to get to their targets?
They used it to steal data, install backdoors, and eventually they were able to get into U.S. local government networks.
Wow. So the smaller organizations were a stepping stone to those bigger targets.
It's like a domino effect. One compromise leads to another.
And interconnected systems make that even worse. Okay, so that's one example. Can you give us another case study?
Let's go back to the CCleaner compromise.
Okay.
APT41 hacked the CCleaner development server, inserted their malware into updates, and basically poisoned the well for millions of users.
Millions.
Yeah, it was a textbook example of a software supply chain attack.
Wow, the reach of that is incredible.
Yeah, it really shows the potential impact. these attacks can have.
It makes you wonder, is there any way to defend against this level of sophistication?
It's definitely a challenge,
Yeah.
but there are strategies that SMBs and government agencies can use to protect themselves.
Well, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and talk about those defensive strategies. Okay, so we've learned about some pretty scary tactics that these APT groups are using.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is, but knowing your enemy is only half the battle, right?
You got it.
So let's talk about defense. What can SMBs, the ones who might be feeling a little vulnerable right now, do to protect themselves?
Yeah, and for SMBs, it's not about building a fortress overnight. It's about implementing layered security, making smart choices.
Right, so what are some of those practical steps?
One of the best things you can do is use EDR, endpoint detection and response.
EDR. Okay.
Think of it like a security guard for every device on your network.
I like that analogy.
Tools like CrowdStrike or Sentinel-Alone can detect those sneaky living-off-the-land tactics we discussed earlier.
Right, the ones that are so hard to catch.
Exactly, and EDR will alert you to anything suspicious that you might miss.
Okay, so EDR, that's a good first line of defense.
Yeah, definitely a good start.
What else can SMBs do?
Adopting a zero-trust architecture is really important.
Zero trust. Okay, and what does that mean?
Basically, don't just trust anyone with access to your systems.
Even people inside the company.
Everyone, especially third-party vendors,
Okay.
restrict permissions, use multi-factor authentication.
Right, so you need more than just a password.
Exactly, and always verify before you grant access.
Trust, but verify.
That's the idea.
Okay, anything else SMBs should be thinking about?
A newer approach that's gaining traction is the software bill of materials.
Okay, what's that?
It's also called an SB bomb. Think of it like a list of ingredients for your software.
Okay, that makes sense.
It shows all the components and dependencies so you can identify any potential weak spots.
Or compromise updates.
Right, so you understand your software's supply chain and verify its integrity.
Okay, so again, trust but verify seems to be the theme here.
It's a good rule of thumb.
All right, well, what about government agencies? What are they doing to protect themselves from these AP2 groups?
They often have access to more sophisticated tools and strategies.
Okay, like what kinds of things?
One interesting method is deception technology, which involves setting up honeypots.
Honeypots, okay.
They're like decoy systems to lure attackers in.
So you're trying to trap them.
It's like setting a trap to see who's snooping around.
So it's not just about blocking attacks, you're trying to learn about the attackers.
Exactly. It's a way to gather intelligence.
Very clever. What else are they using?
Network traffic analysis, or NTA, is another powerful tool.
NDA.
Tools like Darktrace analyze network traffic patterns.
All the traffic, even encrypted traffic.
Yeah, everything to look for anomalies.
So you're looking for anything unusual.
Yeah, it's like looking for suspicious behavior in a crowd, even if everyone's wearing masks.
That's a great way to put it.
And one of the most crucial things in defending against nation-state actors is threat intelligence sharing.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Government agencies need to work together. They need to exchange information about APT infrastructure, tactics, indicators of compromise.
Right.
Organizations like CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, play a key role in that.
So it's not just about each agency protecting itself, it's about a collective defense system.
Yeah, it's like a neighborhood watch for the digital world.
Right, you're all looking out for each other.
The faster you can share information about threats, the better everyone can prevent attacks before they spread.
Makes sense. So we've talked about how state-sponsored hackers are using both cyberattacks and information operations.
Right.
And how they target SMBs as stepping stones to get to those bigger targets.
Yeah.
And how they use things like living off the land to avoid being detected.
It's a complex problem.
It is, but we've also talked about some key defensive strategies.
Yeah, things like EDR, zero trust for SMBs, deception technology, and threat intelligence sharing for government agencies.
And you mentioned domain mimicry earlier as one of those tactics.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that works?
So imagine you get an email that looks like it's from a government agency with an address like govt-contracts.com.
Okay, seems legit.
But look closer. It might actually be govt-contractus.lito.
Yeah.
They'll use a misspelling or a different domain.
Oh, so it's like a fake website?
Exactly. These little changes are easy to miss, but they can lead you to a malicious website.
And then they steal your information?
Right. Things like your login credentials.
So it's like a digital camouflage.
Yeah. It's all about blending in and tricking people.
Okay, so domain mimicry, another thing to watch out for.
Definitely.
Are there any other evasion techniques you think people should be aware of?
One really clever technique is DNS tunneling, which attackers use to take data out of a network secretly.
DNS tunneling, okay, I'm not familiar with that.
So it's basically disguising stolen data as DNS requests.
Hold on, can you remind me what DNS is again?
Yeah, DNS stands for Domain Name System.
Okay.
It's like the internet's phone book. When you type in a website address, your computer uses DNS to find the IP address.
Right, the numerical address of the server.
Exactly.
But how does that work for stealing data?
Attackers can manipulate those DNS requests to hide data within them.
So it looks like normal traffic.
Yeah, it looks like regular DNS traffic to security tools.
So it's like hiding a message in plain sight.
You got it. Using a system that's essential for everyday internet use.
Wow, that's really sneaky.
It's a sophisticated way to bypass traditional security.
It seems like these APT groups are always finding new ways to stay ahead.
It's a constant cat and mouse game.
And that's why staying informed is so important.
Absolutely.
Being proactive and having a multi-layered security approach.
You need all the tools in your toolbox.
Okay. And you mentioned that APT groups often use vulnerabilities in software.
Right.
Can you tell us more about zero-day vulnerabilities? You touched on those earlier with the Microsoft Exchange server hack.
Yeah, so a zero-day vulnerability is basically a flaw in the software that the vendor doesn't even know about.
So it's like a secret backdoor?
Yeah, and attackers find these flaws and exploit them before the vendor can fix them.
So it's a race against time?
Exactly. They're trying to use these flaws before they're patched.
So how can organizations protect themselves from something they don't know about?
That's the challenge with zero-day exploits.
Yeah.
It's really hard to defend against them because there's no hash or signature to detect them.
So what can you do?
Well, you can't completely eliminate the risk,
Okay.
but you can do things to reduce the impact.
Like what?
A good start is having a strong vulnerability management program. That means regularly scanning your systems for vulnerabilities and applying patches quickly.
So staying up to date with software updates is really important.
Absolutely, but patches aren't always available right away.
Right. It takes time to find and fix these vulnerabilities.
And that's where other defensive layers come in. Things like EDR, zero trust, and threat intelligence sharing.
So they act as a backup, providing protection even when you don't know about a vulnerability.
Right. EDR solutions, for example, can detect unusual behavior, even if it's not linked to a known vulnerability.
And zero trust limits the damage an attacker can do even if they get in.
Exactly. It's about limiting their access.
It seems like diversity in your defensive strategies is really important.
Yeah, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. Have multiple layers of protection.
And remember, security is an ongoing process.
It's not a one-time thing.
Right. It's about constantly improving and adapting.
So it's an ever-evolving challenge.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a lot about the technical side of things, but you mentioned earlier that these APT groups also use information operations.
Right.
Things like disinformation and online manipulation.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Can you explain how that works?
Information operations are a key part of modern warfare.
Okay.
And nation-state actors are increasingly using them alongside their cyber attacks.
I see.
They might spread propaganda through fake news websites, manipulate social media, even hack legitimate media outlets.
So it's about controlling the information that people see.
Yeah, shaping public opinion and causing division.
And how do these tactics work with the cyber attacks?
Often they work together. For example, an APT group might hack a government agency, steal information, and then leak it to fuel a disinformation campaign.
Oh, so it's like a 1-2 punch.
Exactly.
They cause chaos with the attack, and then they manipulate the narrative around it.
Precisely.
And these tactics are so effective because they play on our emotions.
Yeah, our biases, our trust in what we see online.
It makes you question everything you see online.
Absolutely.
So how can we tell truth from fiction in this crazy information environment?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, it deserves its own deep dive.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole episode on that.
But in short, it's about being media literate, having critical thinking skills, and being wary of information that just confirms what we already believe.
So check your sources, look for multiple perspectives.
Exactly, and be aware of your own biases.
Right, because we all have them.
And those biases can make us vulnerable to manipulation.
Okay, so we talked about zero trust architecture earlier.
Yeah.
Can you go into a bit more detail about how that works?
Zero trust is a security model that shifts from trust but verify to never trust, always verify.
Okay, so you're always suspicious.
In a way, yeah, it assumes that no user or device should be automatically trusted.
Whether they're inside or outside the network.
Exactly.
So it's like treating everyone as a potential threat until they prove otherwise.
That's a good way to put it.
So what does that look like in practice?
It means you need strict access controls, multi-factor authentication, and you're constantly monitoring user activity.
So even if someone does get in, they can't do too much damage.
Exactly. You're limiting the blast radius.
That makes sense.
Zero Trust is about making security more granular and dynamic.
So it's not just a static set of rules.
Right. Trust has to be earned, not assumed.
It seems like that's really important these days with so many people working remotely.
Absolutely. And with cloud computing, the traditional network boundaries are blurred.
So Zero Trust helps to adapt to that new reality.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the technical aspects of Zero Trust.
Right.
But what about the people? How does it affect the way employees work?
It's true that it can require a change in mindset.
Yeah, I can see that.
Employees might find the extra security measures annoying at first.
Yeah, like having to jump through hoops.
But with the right training and communication, they can understand why it's important.
To protect the organization's data.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between security and usability.
Okay, and you mentioned threat intelligence sharing earlier.
Right.
Can you give some specific examples of how that works?
Threat intelligence sharing can take many forms.
Oh, okay.
It could involve government agencies sharing information about APT groups.
Like their tactics and indicators of compromise.
Yeah, and they share that with each other and with private sector organizations.
So it's about pooling resources to get a better understanding of the threats?
Exactly.
Are there any real-world examples of this?
Yeah, so CISA, for example, regularly publishes alerts and advisories about new cyber threats.
So they're warning people about what to watch out for.
Exactly. And they provide details about attack vectors, malware samples, and mitigation strategies.
So it's like a playbook for defending against these threats.
Yeah, and they also have a platform called the Automated Indicator Sharing AIS system.
Okay, what does that do?
It lets organizations share threat intelligence in real time.
So it's like an early warning system.
Yeah, the faster you can share information, the faster you can react.
That makes sense.
It's all about creating a network of interconnected defense systems.
So everyone benefits from that collective knowledge.
Exactly. And that kind of collaboration is becoming more and more important.
As the threats get more sophisticated.
Right. The threat landscape is constantly evolving.
You mentioned software supply chain attacks earlier. Right. Can you tell us a little more about how those work and what organizations can do to protect themselves?
So a software supply chain attack targets the software development process itself.
Okay.
The goal is to insert malicious code into legitimate software.
So it's like poisoning the source of the software.
Exactly. And once that compromised software is distributed, the attacker has a way into all those systems.
And they can steal data.
Right.
The CCleaner compromise is a good example of that, right?
Yeah, APT41 was able to get their malware into CCleaner updates.
And millions of people downloaded those updates.
It shows how even something as simple as a software update can be a threat.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. So how can organizations protect themselves from these kinds of attacks?
Well, one important step is to have strong security practices throughout the software development process.
Okay, like what kinds of things?
Things like code reviews, penetration testing, vulnerability scanning.
So you're building security into the software from the beginning.
Exactly.
And what about the vendors, the companies that develop the software?
Organizations need to carefully vet their software vendors
to make sure they have good security practices.
Right. Trust but verify.
There's that theme again.
It's important.
Okay. What else can organizations do?
Strong code signing practices are important too.
Okay, what's code signing?
It uses digital signatures to verify that software updates are authentic.
So you know they haven't been tampered with.
Exactly. It's like a seal of approval.
Okay, so that gives you confidence that the update is legitimate.
Right.
And you also need a good patch management process.
Yeah, to make sure updates are applied quickly and consistently.
So you're reducing the time that attackers have to exploit those vulnerabilities.
Exactly.
And it's not just about protecting yourself, right?
No, sharing information about potential supply chain compromises is important too.
With other organizations and government agencies.
Right. It's about working together to limit the impact.
That collective defense idea again.
Yeah, we're all in this together.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a minute and go back to the cyber kill chain you described earlier.
Sure.
Can we walk through a specific example of how an attack might play out in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's say an APT group, maybe APT29, is targeting a government contractor that works on sensitive military technology.
Okay, so a high-value target.
With access to classified information.
Right.
So how does the attack begin?
Well, the first step is reconnaissance, like we discussed before.
Right, gathering information.
They'll learn about the contractor, their employees, their systems, their security practices.
So building a profile, finding those weak points. And how do they get that information?
They might use public sources, like the contractor's website, social media profiles, industry publications,
Okay.
and they might use more covert methods too,
Like what?
hacking into less secure partners or suppliers.
So they can get access to the contractor's network through a back door.
Exactly.
It's like a combination of open source intelligence and cyber espionage.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so they've gathered their information. What's next?
The next stage is weaponization.
Okay.
They create the attack payload. This could be a spear phishing email or malware designed to exploit a specific vulnerability.
So they choose the weapon that's most likely to work based on what they know.
Right. And they're always adapting and testing new techniques.
Okay, so let's say they go with a spear phishing email. What happens next?
That brings us to the exploitation phase.
The attack begins.
The employee receives the email, opens the attachment, and the malware is executed.
And now the attackers have a foothold.
Yeah, they're in the network.
Then what?
From there, they'll start moving laterally through the network.
Yeah. Trying to find the data they want.
Right, and they'll try to escalate their privileges.
So they can access more systems.
Exactly. They might use stolen credentials, exploit vulnerabilities, or even use legitimate tools like PowerShell.
To blend in.
Yeah, to avoid detection.
So they're moving slowly and carefully, expanding their access.
And always adapting to the defenses they encounter.
Like a game of chess.
Exactly.
They're thinking several steps ahead.
Once they have enough access and control, they'll establish a command and control channel.
So they can communicate with their own servers.
Right, and they can start taking data out of the network.
Sending it back to their headquarters.
Exactly.
And they're doing all of this without being detected.
They're using a variety of techniques to stay hidden.
Like blending in with legitimate traffic and using fileless malware.
Right, so there's no trace left behind.
It's a really sophisticated operation.
It requires a lot of skill and technical expertise.
And it highlights the need for a multi-layered defense. You need technology, training, and a culture of vigilance.
It all works together.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But it's clear that the threat from state-sponsored hackers is constantly evolving.
It's a moving target.
Is there anything else you want to add? Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Just remember that knowledge is power. The more you understand about these threats, the better you can protect yourself.
Stay informed, be proactive.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Excellent advice. And remember, folks, in the world of cybersecurity, complacency is the enemy. Stay vigilant, stay informed, stay safe. So it really is a digital arms race, huh?
You could say that.
But shifting back to individual responsibility for a second.
Yeah.
How can everyday people, not just big organizations, stay ahead of the curve when even routine things like software updates can be compromised?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It feels kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, it can be.
So what can we do?
Well, in this environment, complacency is like the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
For individuals, it starts with good cyber hygiene.
Okay, so like the digital equivalent of washing your hands, right?
Exactly.
So what does that look like?
Strong, unique passwords for everything.
Okay.
Be careful about clicking links or opening attachments in emails.
Right. Don't just click on everything.
And of course, keep your software updated.
All the basic stuff.
The basics are important.
Yeah. But as we've seen with these supply chain attacks, individual actions can only go so far.
You're right. There's a limit to what individuals can do.
So what's the bigger picture? How can organizations really stay ahead of these threats?
Organizations need to prioritize security at every level.
Okay, how do they do that?
Investing in good security solutions is crucial. Things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and those EDR tools we talked about.
Right, so they need the right tools?
Yeah, but it can't stop there. They need to do regular vulnerability assessments, penetration testing.
To find those weak spots.
Exactly. And they need to have a plan in place for what to do if something does happen.
Okay, so a good incident response plan.
Yeah, that's crucial.
But even with all of that, the human element still seems like a big factor, right?
It is, especially with social engineering tactics.
People are still the weakest link.
Think about phishing attacks.
Where they trick you into giving up your information.
Yeah, attackers prey on our trust, our curiosity, sometimes even our desire to be helpful.
Right. It's easier to fool someone than to convince them they've been fooled.
Unfortunately, that's often the case.
So security awareness training is really important for employees.
Absolutely. Organizations need to educate their employees about cyber threats,
Okay.
how to spot suspicious emails and websites,
Okay.
the importance of strong passwords,
Right.
and how to report a potential security incident.
So basically building a culture of security awareness.
That's the goal.
So it's about ongoing training, keeping everyone up to date.
Yeah, constant vigilance.
What about using technology to stay ahead? Are there any new tools that can help?
That's where things like AI and machine learning come in.
Artificial intelligence.
Right, they can analyze huge amounts of data
Oh, wow.
in real time,
Wow.
which helps organizations detect and respond to threats much faster.
So it's like using technology to fight technology.
Yeah, you need to stay ahead of the curve.
But with all the complexity of these threats, it seems like it's too much for any one organization to handle on their own.
You're right, collaboration is more important now than ever.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Organizations need to share information, break down those silos.
Right, don't keep everything to yourself.
They need to work with industry peers, participate in threat intelligence communities,
Okay.
and they need to leverage the expertise of cybersecurity professionals.
So it's like that neighborhood watch concept we talked about earlier.
Exactly, working together to strengthen our collective defenses.
Well, this has been a really interesting deep dive.
I'm glad you found it informative.
We've learned about the vulnerabilities, the tactics of these ATT groups, and most importantly, the strategies we can use to defend ourselves.
Knowledge is power.
And in cybersecurity, knowledge is your best defense.
You got it.
Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this has been informative and empowering.
Stay curious, stay vigilant.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge.
Until then, stay safe out there.
And remember, in the digital age, staying informed is the best way to stay safe.